Welcome back to Serious Talk Agentic AI. Thanks for coming along today. I'm Greg Banks, your host. If you've ever sat down to pick a cloud agent hosting platform and realized the cloud has 1,000 rooms behind that one door, this episode's for you. I'm joined again by Tim Harting and Gavin Franklin to break down where agents actually live. Self-hosted, software aligned inside the platform like Salesforce or ServiceNow, or the new wave of provider-hosted options from Anthropic and OpenAI. We get practical about the trade-offs, the cost, the lock-in, and the archetypes we keep seeing across our customers and why hosting is never going to be a single decision. All right, let's get into it. Tim and Gavin back in the studio again. Good to see you guys today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for having us back.
One of these days you're going to kick us off. I know it.
Yep.
That or we're going to get a physical studio. We can do more than just talk, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, man. All right. On the story of AI, the timeline, I've just been thinking about the series of episodes that we've done, thinking back to some of the earliest ones, just about picking the right agent, our playbooks and whatnot. Over recent weeks, we've gotten into context engineering, when, where, and why to use MCP servers, which LLM to pick, how to keep it secure. There's just so much that goes into it. But there's one topic we really haven't dug into specifically. We talked about local versus cloud hosted, but even when you just say go to cloud, that just opens a different door with 1,000 rooms, right? So as we think about the cost and decisions they got to make, right, there's a lot of them. And it's becoming overwhelming to me that there's a volume of encyclopedias that people would have to go read if they didn't have the Agentic AI episodes that we're doing here. A lot of work's going into simplifying these things down for you. Today, we're going to talk about when you're cloud hosting. What are the doors behind that? What are the major levers? And as usual, on the topic of AI, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's a lot to dig into. Again, we've got a really, really good-looking artifact that's, I don't know the hours that went into this, but it's going to be something that everybody's going to want to download and take away. Things that you may not even be thinking about when it comes to cost. But Gavin, I know you kind of pulled a lot of this together. You want to set the table a little bit on how we're going to break this down today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got kind of a callback to one of our previous episodes where we talked about how are you hosting agents, where we dove pretty heavily into some of the differences between some products like Agentforce and self-hosting capabilities. We're now seeing a third option emerge in the industry, which is kind of where we thought this would start to head, which is now the providers themselves are providing hosting options. And even within those hosting options, there's a lot of variability on what problems they're trying to solve. And so this is really just a callback to say, let's look at the three various different options and then dive more into those provider hosted options and figure out a decision matrix essentially to determine what's right for you, what are the positives, what are the trade-offs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a space we've seen a lot of change, especially from some of the bigger labs, even in the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 weeks. And something I think we're going to continue to see more and more evolution in the coming months throughout the rest of this year. I think a lot of the major players initially were in a battle for just having the large language model that everybody wanted to use. Well, now everybody's also fighting for hosting and running your agents in your agent harnesses. And so we'll kind of unpack that a little bit. And I think at the end, we'd like to get to 2 specific examples with Anthropic managed agents, cloud managed agents, and OpenAI workspace agents, because I think they're 2 of the starkest and newer options on the block, and gives everybody a real taste of kind of some of the variations of options that you have when it comes to different hosted options for your business.
Yeah, so just kind of diving in here, let's just have a quick overview of the 3 primary types of hosting that we see today, and I think it's going to continue to expand. Self-hosted is something we've covered previously. So this is something we do with GCP. A lot of companies do it with Amazon Web Services. Essentially just services that live where your users or your customers can interact with a solution that calls an API for an LLM, right? So we've seen this before. We've broken this down quite a few times. But this is an option that is full flexibility, but typically a lot heavier on the cost of build. Right. Then you have your software aligned. We're seeing more of these emerge. Big one we always use is Agentforce, but you have a lot of other capabilities out there. Copilot's a big one that's emerging on top of application layers.
ServiceNow,
Yeah, tons of other ones.
Workday, HubSpot, pretty much any major, ClickUp, name it. Any major SaaS provider at this point has their own flavor of a software aligned agent within their software.
And then you got your provider hosted. So this is kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to hosting options. So this is your LLM providers allowing you paths to host AI agents. And I even think a provider hosted model is going to continue to expand beyond providers, like actual platforms designed and built exclusively around hosting agents and connecting to whatever provider you have.
Yeah, one that we're not getting into, and again, I think this is probably worth another future episode, would be like a Cursor, right? And Cursor now has their own managed harness. So they're not really a LLM provider. They're a IDE-driven development platform, and now they have their own agent hosting options too. And that's a kind of a good segue probably into the next point, Gavin. Is, it's not really like, hey, it goes from, you have this continuity or continuum from self-hosted to provider hosted. It's not really, it's like all in one bucket, then all in the next. It's a continuum, right? And you could have a mix of different options within your architecture as you move forward. So maybe just touch on how it's a continuum and how we're already seeing that in the space today.
Yeah, you will lose efficiency if you say, nope, we're going to be a provider hosted exclusive agent platform, right? Our company is going to align just to that. Because what you'll see is there's going to be some agents that are so important to your infrastructure that you need to maintain maximum flexibility on that span across several softwares. And you maybe even want to build your own capability of determining LLM, like smart LLM decision routing. That's something that's like right up the line of self-hosting, but it would be a lot to develop that for every single agent. Other agents their data is so embedded in one piece of software, and the work that you want to do is so embedded in one piece of software that it's going to make a lot of sense for you to look at your software and say, what are those AI options? And then on top of that, the question is always going to be cost, right? Let's balance the cost to performance ratios here. Is it cheaper to go with a software aligned agent just because we don't have to have as many connections, don't need to bring in as much context to the agent, and we have solid LLM control? Those are all things that I think you need to be considering. And most of the time, you're going to see companies choosing all three of these, 2 to 3 of these. Very rarely you're going to see them locked into one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably one of the things I talk to almost every customer that we're talking to about AI agents on already. Almost to a T, a lot of the different customers we're working with are coming in with the mentality of like, well, we want to pick our AI agent platform. And then they're under this conception that like every agent that they're going to build is going to be the same type of agent on the same platform. And it's all going to be software aligned, or it's all going to be provider hosted, or it's all going to be self-hosted. And kind of one of the first things we talk to them on is like, no, like AI and AI agents specifically are moving towards being so ubiquitous in your business. It's going to be threaded into every piece. Like you're going to want to pick the right tool, the right agent, the right LLM for each use case. There's so many different variables. Is there proprietary information? Is it not? Is it in a part of your business process where you already have a really solid SaaS platform in place that has a good software aligned solution like a Salesforce or a HubSpot or a ServiceNow or not? Is there certain reasoning needs that are really heavy for this use case versus not, right? So there's all these different things that could lead you to go with one or the other. So I think just go in understanding, yes, you're going to, from a procurement standpoint, you're not going to want to go by every tool that you run across, right? You're going to want to use some level of reasoning there. But I would accept that you're going to have a mix of a couple different agent platforms and solutions. So everything's right sized to the use case. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of saying if you're hiring people and you're like, well, we only want one skill set across all our people with the same salary for everybody across the board, regardless. It's you're picking different solutions for different problems. And same with software. It'd be like, oh, I want to just pick one software and use the software everywhere. It's not really possible. Right? There's ways to minimize the amount of software you're using. So you're being wise with making the decisions, but it's going to be the same with agents. So knowing the different options, even if you think right now, okay, we're going to go all provider hosted, we're going to do all local. Probably good to know the different options out there, because I think the reality is pretty much every company is going to live, and have different pieces of their AI agent architecture across this spectrum. Some might lean heavy one way, some might lean heavy the other way. But you're going to have some variety there. Yeah. So let's jump in then to the self-hosted side, Gavin. What do we want to touch on there? Starting kind of with the most flexible, but probably least ready out of the box.
Yep, absolutely. So we've covered a few different things that you need to do self-hosting in the past. A lot of this is all of the different infrastructure that is required to do this. So things like your orchestration, your model calls, your authentication, your secret storage, your tool registry, all of this is going to need to be done by you on the self-hosting option. So obviously the downside of this, it could take months to build something like this out, but I would say there are definitely scenarios where this fits. If you're a company that has a lot of on prem tailored software that isn't supported, maybe you're the company that supports that software and you have a really solid team already in place that works on a lot of these services like AWS, GCP, then this is a pathway that's more open to you than a lot of companies that don't have either those requirements or those capabilities, right? So this is a definitely a much higher lift, but it does give you a ton of freedom to be able to interact with any of these LLMs, or you can design your own harness essentially to how you want your agents to be communicated. You get a lot of security around it. So big trade-offs in the cost, but it is very, very flexible.
Yeah. And I think one of the things to know too, like you mentioned, if you're already used to hosting some of your own software, some of your own architecture internally, there's not really much new here from like the hosting side or infrastructure side that's really that different than self-hosting software has been for the last, 30 years. So I think from a skill set standpoint, if you do have that skill set already in house and that, hardware infrastructure already in house, can be a really viable course of action for sure. All right. Moving forward then. So software aligned. We've already given some examples. Salesforce Agentforce, Microsoft Copilot, ServiceNow Assist, Workday AI. We have ClickUp, Brain, ClickUp Super Agents. Those are all different examples of software aligned hosting. Let's dive into that one.
Yeah, so the real power here is the fact that you have your agent build within the software, which means there's a lot of things that's being inherited by the software. A big piece to this is sharing, data model, and identity. So your actual user information, it's all within the software. So your agent has access to all of that. So you want your agent to make sure that you're following strict data rules and security, software aligned agents can do that if you're working out of that platform. On top of that, if you want your agent to execute some sort of workflow inside the software, those software aligned agents are probably going to be the best for it, right? So, for instance, if you have your sales team operating out of Salesforce and you want them to work with an agent to trigger a sales workflow, it makes sense that the first thing I would look into is Agentforce in that use case, right? So, if you're looking at containerized and data security is important to you, this is where I would look to first. It's also significantly faster build for the most part than a self-hosting option. You don't have to worry about the governance or the operation cost over the agent build and deployment. So it'll follow all the same rules as whatever platform your platform team is used to working in. So that's the real benefit there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just say like two big things kind of that I always ask customers when they're looking at this as an option. One, do you have systems that your users are actively working in all day, every day, and you want them to continue to stay in that user interface? So if you've got Salesforce and you want people staying and working in Salesforce throughout the day because your workflow is already heavy there, definitely probably a strong candidate then to look at software aligned hosting option. Second, and you alluded to it, if the workflow largely lives within that software, probably a good option. But the flip side to that, though, is if you have workflow that works across multiple softwares and you have some complex integrations in place today that maybe are a little brittle, or that could be an option to kind of look away from this and actually look at one of the other two options. Because I think agents for helping work cross-platform to synthesize and move data is becoming an increasingly viable course of action for a lot of different use cases. So I think the other big thing to just kind of recognize here is, is just the cost side of things, right? So at the end of the day, whether you're bringing your own key from an LLM provider or whether you're paying as a pass-through cost of the service provider, you're essentially having to kind of pay two layers. You're having to pay for the LLM layer, whether that's through bringing your own key or a pass-through cost, and then you're having to pay for that software-aligned hosting. So there's two layers of costs, but again, the gains can be pretty significant in terms of time to value and ease of scalability and maintenance, et cetera, if you're already heavy within that software.
The last one that we'll compare here, and I think there's a lot of division within this individual category, and we'll touch on a little bit of that here in just a minute, but you have provider hosted. So this is, like we said, kind of the new kid of the block as far as capabilities of hosting agents. I do think that this is going to be something that continues to grow. Primarily, we're seeing changes right now to OpenAI and Anthropic, and we see changes coming from them every other week, if not faster. So I'm assuming that we're going to see a continuous growing offering pool from both of those and other LLM providers as well. But essentially, what differentiates this from software hosted is the fact that you have your LLM provider, or maybe you're working in a system that's not necessarily designed to fit into a particular flow like Salesforce, right? Like it's not a CRM. You're building the agent capabilities and then deploying it to the provider. So the LLM provider in this case is taking on the hosting capability. So all the things that we covered in the self-hosted option previously, the provider is taking care of. You still have to set up what tools you're connected to. So your MCP connections, things of that nature, but all of those connections live within the provider. You still have to set up, what it is you want your agent to do, what the capabilities of the agent are. But once you get that deployed, once you get it running, the provider is running this. So I think we're going to see this continue to grow. And so what you're building out, you're building things like prompts, system messages. You're making sure that you're deploying what APIs are exposed via MCPs. You may be connecting it to various different examples, files, vector databases that you have embedded documents in. And then you're also building out some policies. So you want to look to this when you're okay. First of all, the big negative of this is you're locked in, obviously, to the provider. So in previous examples, depending some of the software hosted, you're also locked into an LLM provider, but many of them you're not. So you lose that flexibility a little bit. You're kind of hitching your cart to that provider. And then it's really beneficial though when you're executing things that may live across a lot of your individual internal workflows, right? So you wanted to access your mail system, you wanted to access your Salesforce org, you wanted to access your time entries, right? This is where these kind of provider hosted tools, I think, really start to win out because you can have it connected to all of these services and just write agent and with a particular task.
Yep, absolutely. I think to just kind of synthesize or pull, what are you gaining and losing with this versus the other two we already talked about? You're getting that fast time to value like you are with the software aligned agents, but you're also getting a little bit more flexibility. It probably sits somewhere in between the custom, or self-hosted agents versus software aligned. You're definitely going to have more flexibility in terms of what you can do than with a software aligned agent. And again, as Gavin alluded to, you could span across systems, which can be a key advantage. But this is all coming at the cost, of being really locked into a particular vendor, right? With this course of actions. Again, it really just comes down to kind of doing a decision analysis matrix and really kind of determining what you want to prioritize in terms of considerations for each use case. And again, taking on a case by case basis when you're looking at these. So yeah, let's move forward to kind of some key questions people need to maybe keep in mind in terms of how to choose. So if somebody's going in, obviously, maybe they had the preconception at first that everything had to be kind of one option. Okay, now they know, okay, I got to look at across the spectrum here. I might need a mix. But what are some questions then that they should be asking in some patterns that they should be looking for when looking to go, whether it's self-hosted, software aligned, or vendor provided?
Yeah, I mean, I think up front, the first question is structured around, the agent itself. Agents are meant to really automate continuous processes that you have within your business. So the question is, where does the process already live, right? So if it's something that's contained, a smaller process within a system, then that kind of leans more heavily to, software aligned agents. The other thing I would ask is, do you have a platform team in general? Do we even have the capabilities to go self-hosted? What's that cost going to be to build? Because I think that's going to be significant. The next thing is, are we looking at, custom logic? Is there a lot of logic involved that needs to be processed? Or is it more of tasks, right? So depending on which one you go, you could even go into that provider hosted route, and then it's going to split from there, right? So more task centric, you might be looking at OpenAI's capabilities, right? If it's very logic centric, you might be looking at Anthropic's hosted capabilities. So even asking questions like that. Data sensitivity is a really big one. If you're looking for maximum compliance, you want complete control over everything, then you might need to start leaning more into the self-hosted option. I would also say not just data sensitivity, but where does the data live? Are you looking at, on-prem bespoke software that you manage? You're probably looking at more of a self-hosted option. And then lastly, I would say, how will you observe and evaluate the data? Right. So obviously, with all these tools, the observation of how the agent is being interacted with is going to be different based off of the provider in question, based off the software line in question. Obviously, self-hosted, you can get a pretty immense amount of observability out of it, but you are going to see, lower amounts of observability as you move into software or provider.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of common pattern, like we're really kind of seeing kind of 4, let's say, core archetypes or patterns in terms of businesses that we're working with today. And I think most businesses, again, in a continuum, generally kind of fall into one of these 4 patterns in terms of the mix of hosting options that we've talked about. Say the first is kind of the platform first enterprise, right? So think your large mid-market to enterprise size company. You're already really heavy on a CRM and an ERP. Most of your workflows go through those 2 systems. Let's say really common one being like Salesforce and NetSuite, right? You're probably a pretty good candidate to looking at a pretty heavy software aligned AI agent architecture for everything happening within that CRM and ERP, because you're already really heavy within those 2 systems. But then you're probably going to have a little bit of a mix or flavor too of also provider hosted for maybe some bespoke side flows of things that maybe have been hard to do in your 2 large platforms your multiple platforms that you have today. I think the provider hosted can provide a pretty good option, but we see a lot of those companies maybe not going as much with the self-hosted option. They're really wanting to try to get faster time to value, production grade infrastructure, kind of deferring the hosting, onto platform or providers. The next would be kind of the builder heavy software as a service SaaS company. I think here you're going to see a little bit different mix where you're going to go provider hosted for a lot of your product features, where maybe you want some of the advantages of time to market and flexibility and production infrastructure that you get with the provider hosted option. But then you're also going to have some very data sensitive workloads across your business that probably warrant the self-hosting. So you're going to see kind of a mix of provider and self-hosted if you kind of fall within that. Third archetype that we see is like the knowledge worker augmentation, especially if you're a professional services or consulting, company. It's really common to see a lot of provider hosted agents specifically exposed to individuals across your organization, just to provide them a lot of state-of-the-art ready tools. They're usually working across a wide variety of tasks, so you want that flexibility. But again, you're also probably not a company that has a lot of that infrastructure in-house to really self-host. And then you're going to see some software-aligned agents within knowledge worker businesses, largely in some of the processes where you really need to have systems of record around particular things. Maybe within your sales process in your CRM, for example. And then finally, the 4th archetype, regulated industries, maybe where like HIPAA or FedRAMP or other types of regulation are really key. I think here you're definitely going to see a much larger share of self-hosted for sensitive data paths, but then maybe a little bit of a flavor of provider hosted for areas of your process that are non-regulated. So again, you can see across different types of archetypes of businesses, you're going to have different mixes. At the end of the day, know that hosting isn't a single decision. You're going to constantly be making this decision over and over again based on the use case, based on how your business evolves. And you're going to end up with a portfolio of AI agent solutions across your business as you move forward. And so I think the last thing that we wanted to kind of jump in is kind of look at, so the newest slice that we have, we've talked about provider hosted agents, the 2 kind of newest players on the block and that have made kind of the most headlines recently is Anthropic's Claude managed agents and OpenAI workspace agents. To be fair, Google has been around for a while in this space with Vertex AI. So I think that's just why they haven't been talked about quite as much yet, because they were kind of one of the first ones there from the provider side and have been playing in this space for a while. For the sake of today, because they're doing let's focus on Anthropic and OpenAI, I think it's useful to look at them side by side because as we've looked at them and we've started talking and rolling these out for customers as well, realizing as they're two different different angles of tackling the provider hosted space. So Gavin, why don't you break down for us Anthropic Claude managed agents versus OpenAI workspace agents? What are some of the key differences? Why are they both taking a different approach between OpenAI and Anthropic here?
Yeah, it's interesting because as this has evolved, all the LLM providers have taken a different stance, just a different take on what agents mean for them and how they sell agents and how they work with agents and distribute agents and host agents. So I will say, I really want to boil it down. There's two primary differences I want to cover, and then I'll do a little bit more of a deep dive. For Anthropic managed agents and OpenAI's workspace agents, the two primary differences are one, how they're built. So Anthropic managed agents are very customizable, very dev-centric way of building. So it's something you actually work with the Anthropic CLI on, the Claude CLI, to build out an agent and basically package everything within that agent and deploy it to Anthropic's hosted environment. Compared to OpenAI, you actually build these agents via prompt and template, right? So you really don't have a lot of capability and flexibility with what you're building, but you are able to still build and host the concept of agents, and you still work towards taking all of the connectors in OpenAI and making those available to the agents that you're building out. The second big variation is the fact is how you interact with the end source, right? So what Anthropic's going to do is provide you basically an API endpoint to interact with those agents for whatever service you're building, which means that you can interact with that agent anywhere that you want, as long as you have the capability to make an API call, just like you would make an API call to Claude's open APIs. And then on the workspace agents, you're really going to interact with it in OpenAI, in ChatGPT. It's really an evolution of custom GPTs is what it is. So they're really making the play that you're going to be doing your business out of ChatGPT, or you're going to be run your agents out of ChatGPT or Slack. I believe Slack is the additional option they have for hosting those agents. So very different ways of building, very different ways of interacting. But at the end of the day, you're really building those two agents and they're hosting those agents. OpenAI is really looking towards workspace agents. How can you improve your working processes utilizing OpenAI's tools? Where Anthropic is saying, we're actually letting you build agents and using them maybe not just for you, but maybe even your customers, essentially, by exposing an API.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Always just an interesting changing space. I'm for sure this is a topic we're going to continue to revisit down the road for sure. I already know there's kind of a fourth area as well, which is just third-party harnesses or third-party agent frameworks that also provide their own hosting. And you're seeing that with like Cursor. It was something that was big kind of over a year ago before software aligned and provider aligned hosting started coming in. So that's probably something to look at down the road too. And what's interesting is in terms of evals and evaluating, there's kind of some new benchmarks coming out of looking at agent harnesses and how much the harnesses improve the LLM benchmark scores. And I think that's something that's going to kind of get a lot more attention, being like, okay, if I'm going to invest in an agent framework or harness, I want to make sure, whatever agent or harness I'm getting, like if it's Claude Code elevates Opus to score higher on benchmarks. If it's Cursor, their Cursor is new, and I forget the name of their platform, but it actually elevates Opus 4.7 or OpenAI 5.5. So that's a whole other separate topic as well. Again, I think it just leans into, hey, this is a changing space. It's a continuum. You're going to be making this decision at the use case level, and you're going to probably settle around kind of either an archetype in terms of a mix or portfolio of decisions that you have for the use case and type of business you are. So super fascinating. Thank you, Gavin.
Yeah, for sure, guys. I think the one thing hard about doing some of this content in terms of making artifacts is the aging process. Something we wrote down 90 days ago. You really got to go back and do some research on where does that stand today. I want to really highlight the artifact that we're going to be sharing with this episode. There is a lot of takeaways that Tim and Gavin both spoke to, but this is broken down in a slide by slide, one slide for self-hosted, one for the software aligned and whatnot. And then lastly, what we just kind of did with this comparison between Anthropic, OpenAI, there is a categorical comparison of each of those side by side. So yeah, we could read these out to you, but we know you can read for yourself. There's just some good stuff here. So I want to really encourage everybody to download this. And the last thing to say, because this stuff is moving, if you don't have a dedicated team focused on this, chances are you're not keeping up with all the things that are coming. So if you've got questions, if you've got concerns, you want to run that by somebody, Tim and Gavin are swimming in this pool every day and probably on the weekends. But Tim, Gavin, really appreciate y'all pulling this artifact together. This is a really, really great way to break down just about any way I can imagine somebody's going to want to see it. But thank you guys for once again taking this hard topic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Craig.
Appreciate it, guys. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Cirrius Talk Agentic AI. I appreciate you spending time with us today. Here's the line from Tim and Gavin that I keep coming back to. Hosting isn't one decision, it's a portfolio. If you're staring down that decision matrix right now, that's the part worth pausing on before you commit. If this one helped, please like, subscribe, and share it with one architect or technology leader who's about to lock themselves into a single agent platform. The accompanying artifact, the side-by-side breakdown of these three hosting models, plus the Anthropic versus OpenAI comparison, is in the show notes, and you can reach us anytime at SerriusTalk@SerriusSolutions.com. The address will be in the show notes. Tim and Gavin are swimming in this pool every day. If you want to talk through it, that's the door. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep moving forward.